Experience a progressive lens engineered with AI from Essilor, powered by individual measurements of your visual behavior. A lens personalized to you by an Essilor expert. Discover Verilux XR Track and enjoy instantly sharp vision in motion and seamless transitions from near to far. Find your local Essilor expert today at Essilor.com.
Empower.
Claire is practicing her breathing for her upcoming yoga retreat in Bali. Has she ever done yoga before? No. But Claire worked with Empower on her savings and investment strategy. She got good at money, so she can be a little bad. Empower. Invest well, live a little. Join our 19 million customers today at Empower.com.
Past performance is not indicative of future returns. Investing involves risks. You may lose money. Advisory services are provided for a fee by Empower Advisor Group, LLC, EAG, a registered investment advisor with the Securities and Exchange Commission. Om Namaste.
Welcome to the Parent Footprint Podcast with Dr. Dan. I'm your host, Dr. Dan, and you are listening to the Parent Footprint Show. At Parent Footprint, our goal and mission is to create a loving world with more compassionate people, one parent and one child at a time. We believe at Parent Footprint that the key to raising happy, healthy, and engaged and aware kids is for parents to be happy, healthy, engaged, and aware themselves in their own lives. We believe that awareness is the foundation of creating a vision of successful parenting, and this show is about providing awareness to our listeners by having amazing, talented, and engaging guests like the one we have today. The title of today's show is called The Dyslexic Advantage, and I am privileged to have my colleague, Dr. Fernette Eide, enlighten us today. Dr. Fernette is co-author, along with her husband, Dr. Brock Eide, of the great book, The Mislabeled Child, How Understanding Your Child's Unique Learning Style Can Open the Door to Success, and also The Dyslexic Advantage, Unlocking the Hidden Potential of the Dyslexic Brain. That amazing book turned into them co-founding the nonprofit Dyslexic Advantage, which is an organization dedicated to promoting the positive identity, community, and achievement of people with dyslexia. Fernette, thank you for joining me on the show today.
Hey, thanks for having me, Dan.
So I've been looking forward to this for a long time. We've talked about this topic a lot, and what I want all the listeners to know is that you guys, with your book and with your vision, have been changing the paradigm of how people see dyslexia, not just the weaknesses, which I think there's a lot of misconceptions about, but also the tremendous strengths. And today I wanted us to talk about how do we empower parents and listeners to understand more about what are the associated strengths and weaknesses, and how can we empower our kids to maximize their potential. So the first question sounds simple, but it really isn't simple. How would you define dyslexia?
It isn't simple. Well, dyslexia, interestingly enough, when it was first identified in the late 1800s, they recognized that there was kind of something that didn't make sense about a student performing in school, because, in fact, this doctor who wrote the first report about dyslexia said that this lad would be the smartest student in the school if the teaching was all based orally and didn't require reading or writing. So there is this, discrepancy is like, it means kind of a gap, between the obvious intelligence of these people and certain types of activities, whether it's learning to read or whether it's writing, that sort of seem particularly difficult. And so that's originally how dyslexia was first identified. And then, fast forward to the 21st century, there's an overwhelming emphasis on the weaknesses and the challenge, but then too little attention to the strength side, which often can be a gateway to understanding how to best educate students and how to choose careers and things like that.
So I know that there's been, the definition has been changing over time, and it's often been thought of as a language-based learning disability. And then we have the Europeans who've been talking about the visual processing aspect of dyslexia. And I think our modern times, we're trying to put those two things together to describe what's this overall dyslexic profile look like.
That's right. Yeah. There's an evolving story that it really is this different brain wiring, that dyslexic people are perfectly healthy. It's not a disease, but that it's a different wiring that will make certain types of activities and skills, more difficult to achieve or actually easier. And so this sort of strengths, weaknesses aspect really is an evolving story that's backed up by some of the cutting edge neuroscience research.
So I have a difficult time answering the question, what is dyslexia, simply? And so I know that you're going to do a much better job than I do. When someone asks you, so what is it? What is dyslexia? What do you say these days?
Well, a lot of times I say it's a learning difference, that often presents, in childhood, in the first years of school, with more difficulty learning how to read. And so that's the classic kind of presentation. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, these differences are often associated. We came up with the notion of these mind strengths, and it's certainly not limited to them. But those are, there's an acronym. It's involved with material reasoning, so being able to reason through materials. The engineers, architects, are people who really make their living every day with this kind of hands-on intelligence. The I stands for interconnected reasoning, being able to see things in interconnected with other pieces of information. N stands for storytelling, narrative, and that's a strength as well, being able to recount stories and put things together and remember, and then share with others in this kind of story format. And then finally, D is this dynamic reasoning strength, being able to reason in conditions of uncertainty and unstable times. It's the thing that gives dyslexic entrepreneurs an advantage in being able to see ahead on the horizon and things like that.
Yeah, and I love how you led with the strengths, because when you can track these characteristics to early childhood, a lot of people are saying, well, no, you got to wait to see when the kids can read, at school age, and then you're not going to know till third grade. But not only are the characteristic weaknesses observable at an early age, the characteristic strengths, which you just mentioned, are also observable at an early age as well, correct?
That's right. Yeah, and I think some of the more effective strategies for helping students read are really strength-based, using this knowledge. For instance, the multisensory approaches that are typified by Orton Gillingham in terms of learning how to do phonological awareness and things like that. It really takes advantage of some of this hands-on or M strength ability, where if you were to simply use a single modality, have a person try to learn them by looking at and doing rote memorization. If you actually have them model with the materials and actually do things, then it really becomes much more easy.
So you mentioned the four strengths, the four mind strengths, which are, for all those of you out there, not only just to listen to this, but also they are spelled out and given with examples in great detail in their book, The Dyslexic Advantage. But this material reasoning, this engineering, this design aspect, something I learned from you guys is that there are, I believe, 7 man-made wonders in the world, and all 7 have been designed by a dyslexic architect, right? That would be an example of a material reasoning.
Yeah.
Interconnected reasoning. Dyslexics are really good at taking vast and diverse properties and principles and coming up with unique and novel solutions. Narrative reasoning, how many of these Pulitzer Prize and award-winning authors are actually dyslexics because they're great storytellers? You guys featured Roald Dahl in your latest newsletter, and everyone thought that he just sort of wrote funny and talked funny, but it was actually part of his language quirk or language challenge associated with his dyslexia. And then dynamic reasoning, this ability to take past and present data points and predict future outcomes, which is why we think that the research shows about 1 in 3 successful entrepreneurs are dyslexic because of that ability. Now, the flip side, which we do have to talk about because we want our listeners to know what to look for with their kids, since early intervention is key, is what would be the most obvious list of the early signs of the weaknesses?
Well, some of the early signs, as I mentioned, difficulty acquiring reading. It might be more than sort of ordinary difficulty with reversals. I mean, we've talked about a trade-off that might happen where students actually might be very good at being able to rotate things in space in 3D, but their 2D ability to distinguish things is quite complicated. So, B's and D's, it's pretty common to see a lot of reversals in children below the age of 7, but when significant amount of reversals still persist, sort of late 7 and up, then, sometimes that's related to dyslexia.
Yes, yeah, and the other things that you guys have really explained to broaden the, I would say, not the definition, but the profile of all the other brain-associated strengths and weaknesses that you talk about in your first book, The Mislabeled Child. Could you say a little bit about the different sort of memory strengths and weaknesses, for example, that you see, and different sort of processing strengths and challenges you see with this profile?
Yeah, sure. So we talked about something called stealth dyslexia as well, which often we see with gifted students who are also dyslexic, and they might scoot through the early years picking up reading, but then later on the writing becomes a challenge. And one thing that I think people don't realize is that often these stealth dyslexics are really sitting on top of just this gold mine of ideas and cool stories and things that they want to convey. And part of the extreme frustration is that it's hard to put it simply into words. Sometimes in terms of the memory, as you mentioned, it seems like in general as a pattern, dyslexics tend to have more personal memory. It's called episodic memory by the scientists. And it's where you recall things in distinct episodes, places, and times. The scene may come back to you, for instance. That's very different from others who might actually remember things really just in terms of, decontextualized information. They won't see a scene. There's some people who can't visualize at all, in fact. It's very difficult for them to do certain things like visualize. But on the other hand, if they follow their information through words, they might more easily be able to retrieve the experience in terms of words. Although it won't be the same kind of quality. It may be more impersonal. Later on, they may have a hard time remembering where it happened, when it happened, and things like that, because it's not this rich personal memory, which is often associated with more emotional content and sensory experiences.
And I hear all the time, as I know you do too, when we're talking to parents, and they'll say, we don't get this memory thing because they can't remember to bring their backpack from their room, but they remember what I was wearing at the park when their ice cream fell when they were 2 years old. Right? Like this example of the difference between the different sort of memory systems.
That's right. Yeah. It can be maddening at times. It is true. It's this memory paradox where sometimes it's just like, in school, especially if they're not engaged with it and they're asked to memorize state capitals. Well, it won't stick. I mean, no matter how many times you present, it won't stick. At the same time, it's like you say, if they were there, they remember vividly what the temperature was. They remember people they saw there, what people were wearing. And, so it's just being able to recognize if that's really your strength pattern, what you should do is learn how to translate those strengths into, what you're trying to learn in school.
Right, and we're going to talk soon about what is the best way to learn when you have this profile. And I think just to foreshadow, what you're talking about is sort of contextual and meaning-based learning as opposed to rote and memorization, correct?
That's right. And, there are little tricks, too. I mean, in some cases, like if you're a medical student and you have to memorize all these different nerves and things, there are little tricks that you can use. You don't actually have to have a personal experience with every nerve or anything like that, but you can take advantage of that pattern, knowing that particular way you learn best that can, be used to do all sorts of things.
So for our parents out there, if they're sensing some of these signs or they're concerned, what do you suggest a parent do?
Well, get information first. In general, we're big believers in testing. A lot of times most schools aren't testing really for dyslexia. So it's difficult because you might actually have to pursue private testing. But I think the testing can be really valuable, especially if you can get the results that tell you about the relative strengths and weaknesses in your child, because that might help you figure out how to strategize about the best way to go about doing things, learning things, and doing certain types of school subjects.
Yeah, and this is the unfortunate frustration of this complex profile, particularly like you said with the brighter kids or the stealth dyslexics, is there isn't one test that you can just do a screener for and, that's dyslexia, because the profiles can be so complicated and varied.
While that is true, there's truth to that. I think, I think it's actually, still pretty easy if you do all the different tests to be able to identify, and target that. And I think we're going in the direction of even more streamlined tests at being able to, give people, teachers and children and the parents more practical information. But it is true. It does. There are a lot of different, within these broad brush categories of dyslexic and not dyslexic, there are different variations that can make a difference.
And I also think for context setting, too, because we do trust our educators and we trust psychologists and we trust physicians. But the reality is that you've learned and that we've learned from you and Brock is that most educators, even at advanced levels, and including psychologists, don't get specialized training in what dyslexia is, and yet are the people who are saying the front lines of whether students have or don't have dyslexia.
Yeah, it's surprising. I think that's why the more information parents can get, through programs like this, through your your organization, or through Dyslexic Advantage, really the better, because it is true, and just shockingly so, that you can get through all your higher education to train as a teacher and get very little in dyslexia. I heard even today where we're right near the University of Washington, and we have a number of kind of world famous researchers in dyslexia. I heard from a recent graduate that if you pick your electives, it's possible to graduate with no background training in dyslexia. And I think it's situations like that where you really need to change the laws and make sure everyone gets it. But that's why parents today, really the more information you get, the better you're going to be able to help your child.
Mm-hmm. In terms of intervention, and we always talk about early intervention. Oh, before I say that, the point I wanted to make was for parents, we suggest you trust your instincts, because when something is not adding up. When you've gone over sight words with your kids who have strong abilities in other areas and they cannot remember their sight words, or they can't remember their math facts, or they can't remember the capitals, which I still can't remember, right? Those are signs, and you need to trust yourself, even if the first one or two people say, hey, they're fine, they're performing at grade level, it's all good. Right. So it really, this is about awareness, this show, and, you being aware of your child, your own experiences is just so key here. So, Fernette, once there's a concern, there's a diagnosis from an expert or specialist, what are the steps for intervention?
So, sometimes it's going to be, for instance, if a student has trouble with hearing all the sounds for phonics, or if it's a problem with remembering them, then some of the intervention might be, a curricular one, certain things to do there. In some cases where it's writing, there's so many words, and English in particular is a difficult language for spelling. You might have to take a really big picture, where you're doing certain types of approaches to learning word families and things like that. And in the meantime, you might have the student work with a word prediction software where they can make these educated guesses and then see what the correct spelling is and put it in their writing. What you don't want to do is prevent them from getting their ideas on paper by limiting them either to whatever they can get out with a pencil and paper, or without any kind of assistive technology.
This episode is brought to you by Prime Video. In the small town of Holland, Michigan, nothing is ever what it seems. Behind the tulip festivals and pretty houses lay dark secrets that threaten to tear a marriage apart. Nicole Kidman stars in this darkly twisted thriller about a wife and mother whose quest to uncover her husband's secrets may get her more than she bargained for. Holland, streaming on Prime Video March 27th.
Support comes from ServiceNow. We're for people doing the creative work they actually want to do. That's why this ad was written and read by a real person and not AI. You know what people don't want to do? Boring, busy work. Now with AI agents built into the ServiceNow platform, you can automate millions of repetitive tasks in every corner of your business, IT, HR, and more, so your people can focus on the work that they want to do. That's putting AI agents to work for people. It's your turn. Visit ServiceNow.com.
This episode is brought to you by Honda. Introducing the all-new, all-terrain Honda Passport Trail Sport, the most off-road capable Honda Passport Honda has ever dreamt up. The Passport features increased ground clearance, roof rails on all trims, and available specially developed all-terrain tires. And you'll stay comfortable with tri-zone climate control and available features like heated and ventilated front seats and a panoramic moonroof. Learn more at honda.com/passport.
So you're talking about wonderful accommodations through technology, keyboarding, audiobooks, reduced writing so they can listen. Something that we're not talking about directly is that a lot of these kids who are dyslexic also have this thing called dysgraphia, where it's really hard for them to get thoughts pencil to paper and also just actually the mechanics. And some of these kids learn by listening. So if we're having them take down notes, not only are they going to get behind, but they're not even able to learn from their listening channels. So these are all accommodations. And you had mentioned earlier, Dr. Orton and Dr. Gillingham, would you say a little something about the multisensory approach for intervention and rewiring the brain?
Yeah, multisensory usually means there's more than one route in for taking in information. So rather than saying, well, you're going to do your spelling by just looking at the list because that's how you can learn it. It might be much better, for instance, if they write it out in the air, which, involves some kinetic learning. You can enhance the sensory aspect of it by writing in like dried rice or sand or things like that. But in addition, by saying letter by letter, that can be another sense that you're getting because it'll go through the auditory route. So it's not all high tech when you hear multisensory, but it means a careful consideration of multiple routes of getting the information in, because you can find out very quickly that that's the better route to get in a particular child by just trying things, doing it the standard way with just sort of one way of learning, either, just say, visual writing versus something where you actually have them do something, model the spelling words in clay or something like that. And often very quickly you can see what the preferred routes are.
Mm-hmm. Well, and speaking to the preferred routes, I have to ask what seems to be a controversial question, although those of us who work in this field often scratch our heads, is what about the visual processing system and the controversy around vision therapy for actually helping a dyslexic?
Yeah, it is controversial, and and it's a pity. I mean, because I think there's a lot of vision therapists who really help. I don't think that so in general, as a group, young children will often have visual difficulties of one sort or the other. They might have mild lazy eye or things like that. And so what vision therapists can help is in the area where children are having a lot of line skipping, word skippings, and things like that. If they're starting to have rubbing their eyes and having spasm, if they might need glasses and you weren't aware of it. So there are lots of issues like that where they can be of help. It's not that these visual issues cause dyslexia, you know what I mean? But that it's a common situation that children will have visual issues. And as a group, at least when they've done studies, dyslexics versus non-dyslexics, these are usually small studies, there's a slightly higher incidence of visual difficulties with dyslexic children. So, I think that kind of thing, if there are a lot of visual issues associated with reading, usually we say, if you haven't had your eyes checked in a year, then why don't you see a developmental optometrist?
Right. Excellent. your organization, one of the mission and charges of your organization is to develop a positive identity in the dyslexic community. What do you recommend to parents to help develop that positive identity in their children?
There's a lot of stuff. Go visit dyslexicadvantage.org, I'd say. We have a lot of videos. See if there's a particular interest of your child. Maybe we'll have a short interview of an adult talking about being dyslexic and also how they found their kind of super strength. And sometimes that can be really helpful. We do have some more cartoon-oriented animations that can also help students conceptualize what it means to be dyslexic. And I have to say that that was one of the things that we found most liberating in our clinic. That children, once they kind of got it, they knew that they were different anyway. But putting a name to it, and then recognizing what they might be able to do well and what they've even seen in themselves, that was really pretty cool. It's just a beautiful thing. I mean, you can see it's a night and day change. It's one of the most satisfying things of being in the business. I'm sure you're aware of this, Dan.
Yeah.
It's fabulous, and so it's a little bit by baby steps. And sometimes when you're talking to these students, you might have to do a little convincing. But it's like the more and more you present evidence, I mean, they're intelligent. They're going to start seeing the patterns and seeing it in themselves. And then, a lot of the work is not so bad anymore. If it's just the sinking feeling, like I'm not going to make it, and I think when you can give that to the student, then you'd be amazed what they can actually do with perseverance and grit and all those positive things, just getting through the tough part, because it keeps getting better and better as long as they're not so discouraged about themselves.
Right, and they realize they have these strengths. It's not due to their intelligence. They're not dumb. They're actually very smart and creative, and they have a pattern of strengths, and they also have these challenges that they can learn to work around. And it's their whole package, that's a whole good package that they come to embrace.
Absolutely right.
Okay, we're getting down to our final few questions. My second to last question for you is, as a parent listening to this show and thinking, okay, I think this is, my child is maybe dyslexic, or I'm getting a feeling. What is one thing, like if, we're all going to get a little overwhelmed, what is one thing you would suggest to a parent to do?
Besides get information? I think that would be the key.
Just get the information.
Yeah. What? Go to the website now, watch video, learn more. I mean, because that's the key.
Right. And if it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck. So you can then take the next step, huh? That's
right. There are a lot of people in that category. It's a great point that you bring up who are not formally diagnosed, and sometimes they feel uneasy. When you start to line up your, all your patterns in a row, you'll see it. And just recognize that a lot of people are not formally diagnosed. But yeah, if it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, it is a duck.
Okay, the last question that everyone's been waiting for, and that is the parent footprint moment. So this is the part of the show where our guest tells us about their parent footprint moment, and the parent footprint moment is when you had an awareness as either as yourself as an individual and or as a parent, and because of that awareness, your child benefited. Do you have one of those to share with us, Fernette?
Sure do. And I think it's a brilliant point. I love this idea of yours. I mean, it's really brilliant. So my parent footprint moment happened with kinder music. And kinder music is sort of like this warm, cuddly notion of going with your toddler to a music class with other toddlers and just, enjoying music. And so we took our first child. I took a first child. This was like a mommy and me class, and he hated it, which I just couldn't understand. And so I have to say, initially, I'm just like, what? You're wrong, and it did make me stop. And then, all these preconceived notions, I could see why, of course I love music when I was little, and, my family, everyone in the family loved music. It even made it harder, I think, for my child, because, I mean, truth is this was not his thing, and, and if anything, I think it was too much noise. It was too much, kids moving around. It was just kind of sensory overload for him. And then it did make me kind of revisit my assumptions about what I wanted to do, what my expectations were for my child, and rather sort of growing up, growing together to find out what he loved, what he wanted to do, what his likes were, that it sort of snuck up on me. And I think it's really easy to do, but having that realization really made me more aware of the many ways in which we can communicate that to the child, because you can blame them and things like that. And it's such a simple concept, but really there's so many reverberations of it.
Well, and that is such a wonderful early key awareness, because you came upon that when he was young, it sounds like. Those classes start pretty young. So yeah. I'm imagining that that was a poignant moment in deciding what you support, or, what's something you want versus something that he wants.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a great parent footprint moment. Fernette, please tell everyone where they can learn more about you guys, how they can find you in the newsletter to get all of this information, which is the one thing that they should be doing if they have a concern.
Yeah, well, visit us, DysleXicAdvantage.org. There you'll be able to sign up for our free newsletter magazine. It's a fantastic magazine, lots of free resources and things like that. A lot of people like to share it with their teachers and extended family members. And we're really, I think, just in a new era of education about dyslexia. It's a great time to be dyslexic, I think, because we're, dyslexic people are finding each other. We're starting to share stories and actually recognize a lot of strengths, which is, kind of exciting for the next generation. And I think by working together too, I think we've been able to get all the accomplishments and the laws and things passed that'll make it even better.
Well, and I have to say, so first of all, too, it is a wonderful newsletter. I strongly suggest everyone get it. It's like it comes to life. So you guys are using these new state-of-the-art visuals and just programming and imagery that it really comes to life, and it is multimedia. And as someone who I just can't say enough to you and Brock, who has really leading the charge in this paradigm shift, which is creating a positive identity for dyslexics, figuring out what we do right, and it has had a tremendous impact on my life and my family's life. So I just want to thank you, and we'll continue to support your work. So thanks, Fernette, for being on the show.
Well, thank you.
Okay, everyone. So our show is coming to an end. If you want to contact us, email us at podcast@parentfootprint.com. Please visit our website at www.parentfootprint.com. And as always, I'm going to lead you with this guiding question. What footprint do you want to leave?